Sci-fi and horror often find themselves intertwined since both genres regularly deal with one of humanity's most enduring fears, the unknown. Even though Frankenstein, 28 Days Later, and The Thing seem drastically different from one another, the unknown element is pivotal to each story and elevates the fear factor. And with modern technology advancing at an astronomical rate, the difference between science fiction and science fact has never been closer. That's why it's no surprise to see an abundance of science-themed creepfests have hit streaming services and cinemas throughout the 2020s. In recent years, there's been a plethora of sci-fi horror sequels, remakes, and prequels, some of which have reignited interest in dormant IPs. We've also seen a few original stories that are so well received they could very well kick off into the next big franchise. The decade may only be half over, but there are already several gems in the genre that are destined to become classics in the same vein as Predator or Alien. Whether you're into creepy crawly extraterrestrials, scientists playing God, technology going awry, or interdimensional creatures, the entries here prove the 2020s had something for everybody. I'm Sean Fardick for What Culture Horror, and here are the 10 best sci-fi horror movies of the 2020s so far. Number 10, Sputnik. In Igor Abramenko's directorial debut, a cosmonaut called Konstantin crash lands on Earth shortly after his mission goes belly up. After being transported to a research facility, a psychiatrist called Dr. Klimova is hired to assess Konstantin's mental state, or so she believes. Over time, she learns the real reason she's been tasked with speaking to Konstantin is to determine how dangerous he is, since he's unknowingly harboring an extraterrestrial organism. Despite the outlandish premise, Sputnik is surprisingly grounded, since it focuses on Konstantin and Klimova's intense bond above all else. Although Konstantin's circumstances are terrifying, Klimova's backstory is equally fascinating. Klimova's reputation has been sullied, so she knows this consultation is the only way to fix her career. When she discovers Konstantin is considered expendable by the government, she's the only one willing to save his life. You get so invested in both characters' dilemma, it's easy to forget that this is a monster flick. As a result, it packs a punch when Sputnik goes full creature feature, leading to all sorts of bloody action and stomach-churning body horror. There's enough violence to satiate gorehounds, but the back-and-forth conversations between Konstantin and Klimova are the most memorable thanks to the sharp script and visceral performances from the leads. Number 9, Megan. The promotion for Megan, okay, I'm going to call it Mithrigan, okay, it's out of my system, were so aggressive and imaginative, the cyber thriller was shaping up to be a huge hit regardless of its quality. Fortunately, Megan proved to be one of the smartest and funniest slashers in recent years. The story revolves around an orphan called Katie, played by Violet McGraw, who's reluctantly adopted by her aunt, a robotics engineer called Gemma, played by Alison Williams. Although things seem promising when Gemma urges Katie to befriend her android prototype, things take a nasty turn very quickly. What makes Megan work is how it balances its themes perfectly, serving as a tongue-in-cheek satire that explores technology addiction in a way that's relevant without feeling forced. Watching Katie interact with the titular villain to the point where she can't function without her will resonate with anyone who has trouble tearing themselves away from their devices. Also, the film isn't afraid of making likable characters heavily flawed. Gemma comes across as fittingly robotic, while Katie is sometimes depicted as ungrateful and brattish. However, depicting the leads this way makes them surprisingly sympathetic, since their behavior is understandable and somewhat justified. Also, there are some genuine laugh-out-loud moments, which juxtaposes brilliantly with the brutal gore, at least in the X-rated version. And with a sequel and spin-off already in the works, Megan looks like the beginning of a solid and lucrative franchise. Number 8, Black Box. 2020's Black Box centers around a father called Nolan, who suffers debilitating amnesia, making it impossible for him to look after his daughter. Out of desperation, he agrees to be hooked up to an experimental device that reactivates lost memories. But when a shadow figure keeps appearing in Nolan's memories, he realizes some things are best left in the past. Similar to Memento, Nolan's circumstances make him an unreliable narrator unwillingly, so it's difficult to tell how accurate these events are. Has Nolan forgotten certain memories, or is he deliberately suppressing them? Is his family and acquaintances being truthful to him? Even though there are some cliched routes Black Box could have gone down, it remains consistently innovative right until the end. Also, the shadowy figure that keeps haunting Nolan deserves special mention. It has a simple but creepy design, resembling a limb-popping, contorted, faceless humanoid. Due to its AI-like movements and uncanny valley appearance, this mysterious entity proves to be nerve-shuddering every time it shows up. The sci-fi logic is a tad messy, but Black Box proves to be a creative and entertaining thriller overall. Number 7, Alien Romulus. It's safe to say Alien Romulus is the third best entry in the Alien IP. If Ridley Scott's space saga hadn't lost its way over 30 years ago, such a claim would carry more weight. However, there's no doubt that Fede Alvarez's sidequel has revitalized the brand in a way its creator couldn't manage with Prometheus or Alien Covenant. Covenant. Serving as a direct sequel to Alien, Romulus follows a miner called Rain, played by Kaylee Spaney, who's trying to make ends meet on a space colony. She and her adopted brother, the android Andy, join a ragtag group of scavengers. They go aboard the Romulus space station. Wackiness ensues. Due to the last few Alien flops, skepticism surrounding Romulus was reasonable. Fortunately, much of that cynicism is put to rest early on. The film quickly and efficiently fleshes out the characters, makes their relationship with one another clear, and sets up their inner conflicts. Even though Rain and Andy, played by David Johnson, serve as substitutes to Ripley and Bishop respectively, they never feel like carbon copies thanks to the tight script and the actors' phenomenal performances. Rather than going for cheap scares and sensational gore, Romulus builds the tension slowly. The subtler approach is a great idea and makes it more effective when a jump scare is thrown in. Sadly, Romulus loses points for relying on nostalgia bait. Was anyone pining for Ian Holmes' return from the grave? Despite these fumbles, the future for Alien hasn't been this bright since the 80s. Number 6. Possessor. Directed by David Cronenberg's son, Brandon Cronenberg, Possessor follows a secret agent called Tasia, played by Andrea Riseborough, who's been tasked with mind-swapping with people, driving them to perform assassinations. Unfortunately, body hopping isn't a perfected science, causing Tasia's life to spiral out of control. Not only does the twisted body horror have an inventive premise, it constantly goes in directions nobody expects, which is sure to keep everyone on edge. Much like his father, Brandon has a talent for portraying the most brutal gore imaginable without it coming across as gratuitous. Every bloody moment has a deeper purpose, which makes it leave a greater emotional impact, especially one unforgettable confrontation involving Sean Bean's character. There's plenty of bloodshed, but it's more entertaining watching the mind-melding tech taking a psychological toll on Tasia. The plot is dense, but Possessor is never bogged down with heavy exposition, since Brandon Cronenberg relies more on visual storytelling. The ensemble should also be praised, since they're able to convey a diverse range of emotions, sometimes without uttering a word. It may harbour the DNA of David Cronenberg, but Possessor is warped and twisted in its own way. Number 5. Color Out of Space. Richard Stanley's psychedelic thriller kicks things off with a meteorite landing by an isolated farmstead, owned by Nathan Gardner, played by Nicolas Cage. The space rock irradiates the area, affecting everyone in Nathan's family, either psychologically or physiologically. And since this is an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, it isn't long before things go in a cerebral and nightmarish direction. What makes Lovecraft iconic is how his cosmic stories don't abide by the laws of reality, which makes them extremely unnerving and wildly unpredictable. Fortunately, the director nails this aspect perfectly. Even after the meteorite distorts space-time, urges Nathan's wife to nonchalantly chop her fingers off, and the local animals fuse together, there's never any idea where the story's going next. But since there's always a looming sense of things can and will get significantly worse, the tension keeps escalating. Even though excessive special effects could have undermined the otherworldly elements, the filmmakers used a beautiful mix of subtle CGI, prosthetics, puppetry, animatronics, and luminescent lighting, making everything look suitably out of this world. Considering how difficult it is to bring Lovecraft's work to the big screen, it was bold for Richard Stanley to adapt Color Out of Space, especially since the director's last adaptation, The Island of Dr. Moreau, was an unmitigated disaster. Against the odds, Richard Stanley captures the cosmic horror and existential dread of the source material, devising one of the best Lovecraftian movies ever. Number 4. The Call. In this South Korean Netflix exclusive, a young woman called So Young receives a phone call from a stranger called Young Suk, who's being abused by her stepmother. Worse still, the stepmother intends to kill Young Suk. Somehow, that's not the craziest part. Despite the fact that So Young is living in 2019, Young Suk is somehow calling her from the year 1999. Fortunately, So Young uses her knowledge of the past to stop Young Suk from being murdered. However, So Young's actions triggers a series of events, turning Young Suk into a serial killer. Not only does The Call have an ingenious premise, the timey-wimey thriller explores it from every angle, offering many thought-provoking and mind-bending scenarios. There's one moment that stands out where the two chase sequences are occurring simultaneously in the same location but 2 decades apart. Even though moments like this could be confusing, the amazing direction makes it clear what's happening at all times, magnifying the suspense. It's also fascinating to see So Young and Young Suk fight each other, not with weapons, but with time. Though Young Suk can undo things in her rival's timeline, So Young can research information from her enemy's time period and use it against her. And with a few twists tossed in for good measure, The Call is sure to enrapture anyone from beginning to end. Number 3. A Quiet Place Part 2. As mesmerizing as A Quiet Place was, it seemed risky for John Krasinski's directorial debut to spawn a sequel. After all, what could a follow-up do that wasn't simply more of the same? Luckily, A Quiet Place 2 was a total triumph. A Quiet Place was very personal, centering around a single family called the Abbotts, who are forced to live silently in a world ravaged by aliens with hypersensitive hearing. Rather than rehashing its ideas. Part 2 has Evelyn Abbott and her children traveling and interacting with other survivors, which expands the lore and offers a better understanding of how this post-apocalyptic world functions. Each member of the family has been through drastic changes since we last saw them, showcasing a different dynamic between them. Now the Abbotts know the extraterrestrials' weakness. Their goal is not just about survival, but getting the world out to defeat these creatures once and for all. It's more action-heavy this time around, but Krasinski doesn't sacrifice any emotional depth, once again proving his skills as a visual filmmaker. The phenomenal prologue proves the action is of the highest caliber, while also presenting context with how the invasion came to be. It may not have the same oomph as its predecessor, but A Quiet Place Part 2 is still one of the strongest horror sequels released recently. Number 2, The Substance. In Coralie Fargier's second feature, an over-the-hill starlet called Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, hopes to reclaim her stardom by taking an experimental drug, which creates a young clone of herself, played by Margaret Qualley. When the clone misuses the drug, it sets both ladies on a path of self-destruction. The Substance does a remarkable job at not coming across as derivative, despite the done-to-death social commentary. The dark satire combines elements from other body horrors like The Fly, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Tetsuo into a fittingly Frankenstein monster, but still remains fresh. The OTT sequences are guaranteed to leave an impression, but there are subtle moments that are just as effective. During one scene, Elizabeth prepares for a date, but becomes self-conscious of her appearance. As Elizabeth prepares to leave, she notices the distorted reflection in the doorknob, exaggerating her imperfections and compounding her insecurities. What makes this scene so palpable is how Moore effortlessly conveys her inner turmoil without any dialogue whatsoever. The Substance also stands out for creating a delightful blend of horror and comedy. One person may find a certain scene hilarious, while another will find it hauntingly traumatic, especially the ending. The themes are nothing new, but the way The Substance explores societal pressures is uniquely elegant and horrifying. Number 1, The Invisible Man. Lee Whannell's reimagining of H.G. Wells' novel follows an architect called Cecilia Cass, played by Elizabeth Moss, who finds herself being stalked by her supposedly dead husband, Adrian Griffin, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen. Just to make matters worse, Griffin has found a way to turn himself invisible. Cecilia's incorporeal stalker uses his newfound powers not just to attack his wife physically, but emotionally. He turns Cecilia's friends against her, tarnishes her reputation, and compels her to question her sanity. He gaslights her with such flawless precision, nobody believes Cecilia when she claims her partner is abusing her, which is disturbingly relatable in this day and age. The idea of a mad scientist turning himself invisible may sound outdated, but the film does a superb job at giving the story a modern twist without compromising the source material. Moss gives the performance of her career, serving as the movie's emotional anchor. Watching Cecilia transition from a damsel in distress to an adaptable heroine in such a believable way is incredible to bear witness to. Even though the trailer appears spoiler heavy and some elements seem predictable, The Invisible Man has plenty of twists and turns that are sure to throw off anybody. Since the titular villain can't be seen, the film doesn't need to rely on darkness or telegraphed scares to be frightening, which is refreshing. In fact, the most shocking scare, and one of the best of the decade, happens in a brightly lit room with no build-up whatsoever, which is sure to give the most seasoned horror veterans a fright of their lives. As ironic as it sounds, The Invisible Man is one sci-fi horror that needs to be seen by everybody.